Hi everybody, welcome to the third and final of the video series where we talk about organisational restructure and the impact to resourcing. So we've had two video sessions now which have taken you through and set the scene around an organisation that manages or had managed the labour hire of geologists, and as a result of certainly growth strategies, the business made decisions to increase or expand its geology network, and as a result, unfortunately, with the downturn in the mining industry, it meant that we had to introduce some significant HR changes and certainly some challenges from a people perspective to keep the business one, operational, two, successful as we could, and three, viable. This part of the series now will sort of touch on the outcomes as a result of those strategies, and then specifically what are some of the learnings from a HR point of view that we can take from that. Unfortunately, as a result of those changes, the market and certainly the mining industry itself hasn't probably to this day, and certainly during my tenure with that particular company, didn't improve. And unfortunately, as a result, due to financial constraints and pressures, the CEO made a decision to cease or close operations, which meant that business went into voluntary liquidation, or insolvency is another term. So from a HR point of view, I had to then work closely, certainly with the management team, around communicating that outcome with not only staff, but certainly the leadership team, and what that meant for individuals. Because of the financial constraints, what it meant too is that for a number of weeks, employees weren't actually paid. They'd performed work, and unfortunately, as a result of the financial pressures, for many, including myself, there was a requirement, if you wish to stay in the business, to continue to work effectively free of charge until the federal system came into play, where people could look to engage an agency to assist in recovering those funds through the liquidation process, which is otherwise known as FEGS. So hopefully none of you have to be involved in any significant restructure which results in a company closing its doors, but the challenge certainly from a HR perspective is to make sure that you have conversations with employees about what that means, but too the difficulties too that faces for individuals to then go home and tell their families. It wasn't a great time in terms of having to communicate that, and also too that employees were certainly wanting to know what that meant for them around their entitlements and when they would have access to that. In terms of timeframes, I can let you know that certainly post the closure, I remained with the business for 4 to 6 weeks to help them with that exit process, which meant providing that information certainly to the federal government, but also to the liquidators who came in. The business closed doors around July of that year, and in terms of receiving any entitlements around redundancy, leave and outstanding wages, that was December. So for many people that were certainly rely on that paycheck, unfortunately for many, they weren't able to access those funds for or have access to that for certainly for 6 months. So overall, you could look back and say that HR strategy was effective. Was it or wasn't it? Was it appropriate? Was it the best that we could do? Could we do more? I think in retrospect and looking at it, we allowed the business to stay open for longer than it probably would have. Not to say those strategies were the best of the best, but certainly allowed us to achieve some outcomes, which meant that we were able to retain our people for as long as we could, with the view that they certainly work with us as well around leave arrangements and contract changes. In terms of learnings, I'm not too sure if you've got any particular questions on these cases or have noted some questions, concerns, or things that you might do differently if you're a HR professional. Probably from my perspective in terms of learnings, I'd say that one of the key ones was around the engagement of full-time labour in a market that wasn't really stable and certainly wasn't guaranteed, which I'd say created an undue burden for the organisation over the longer term. Certainly close to the end, prior to its closure, we were able to adapt our contracts around the retainer piece. A little too late, that could be a question that some of you may ask. Was effective at the time, but may have been a strategy that we should have looked at from the start. But the view ultimately from the CEO was the mining industry was booming. We were a growing organisation, that would be something we wouldn't need to think about. In retrospect, certainly on my engagement, that could have been a particular strategy we should have looked at around how we engage our workforce, being a labour hire business. The other one, probably another learning I'd say would be, do we use our legal framework to our advantage to achieve effectively the flexibilities that we needed through those peaks and troughs? And I'd suggest that probably answers the previous question as well around did we engage that as soon as we could, with the view that we wanted to be open and transparent with our people. And I'd say it was more of a journey together rather than making significant change around the legal pieces. However, something that we may need, or could have thought about at the time. Also too, I had noted and mentioned certainly in the first video was around the extraordinary amount of wages that we were paying to certainly graduate geologists. We say that the rate of pay had to be attractive to be the best, and certainly if competitors were to poach our geologists, what sort of money would they have to pay to even be considered to move? That was a big challenge certainly for our CEO wanting to pay the best, which meant that we would retain the best and that they wouldn't need to look elsewhere. It could be another concern that impacted on our financial pressures as well towards the end. The last couple of points, certainly from a learning perspective, I'd have to say is that we allowed the burden of our resourcing probably to continue longer than we needed. As I'd said, we probably had a transition plan of geologists coming back from the field for anything up to 3 to 6 months, which meant it was costing our business, $1,000 a day per person. There was certainly uncertainty around the length of time, I would say, around the change, certainly in the market conditions. We wanted to hold tight with the view that if we had a change in the market quite rapid, we had the workforce to be able to be deployed. So there's probably a balance there around, we wanted to engage and retain our people, one from a security point of view and a guarantee point of view. They'd ridden the journey with us and we felt that there was an obligation to help them. The second piece though was, did we keep them on our books for too long and then just re-engage them when we needed to? Effectively there was a cost with the redundancy, but it's probably something for us to be, could have been mindful of. And certainly for organisations moving forward, it's probably something to be mindful of too. I'd say we did have a strong focus on people and engagement throughout the journey. Unfortunately, when you come to change around redundancies, jobs, people's families, unfortunately those emotions are a roller coaster and it's about balancing and managing those. Was that sustainable? I don't think so in terms of continuing to do so. We tried different, intrinsic and extrinsic rewards where we could to incentivise people going to the field, as I said, in those retainer contracts. We also tried to implement some other strategies, certainly at a local level, around keeping people motivated and engaged where we could. But we realised, in all of those efforts, people still had those fundamentals at heart around, do I have a job tomorrow? Will I get paid tomorrow? And those are very key things that we need to be conscious of. So did we do the best we could? I think we were open and transparent. The challenge is that you've got to make difficult decisions at some point in time, and when do you need to do that? So in summary, I hope that's been of benefit in terms of sharing with you an experience in my time in one of my HR roles. The emotional roller coaster myself of having to manage expectations around our leadership team, our CEO, who was the owner and the founder, who unfortunately had to see his business in terms of closing its doors. Managing the highest of highs around recruitment and seeing the business wanting to grow from an entrepreneurial small business to certainly a large geology business, and in 2 years, unfortunately myself having to lose my role and having to reassess and reevaluate what that all meant for me as well. So I'm sure we will talk a little bit more throughout the semester, but certainly one learning that I wanted to share that you might be able to tie some of the theory to. Thanks.